Boldwood presents The Codebreaker's Secret, written by Kathryn Law and read by Mia McCallum. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. July 1967. The tender, open-faced rose cupped in Eliza's palm smelt just like butter icing, sugar and cream combined. The petals were dewy, almost without colour, and resembled the bloom on her baby daughter's cheek, the vulnerable, translucent pink exactly like her tiny fingernails. The memory of Stella's birth 25 years ago distracted her. She had wanted the baby to mark the end of all that had gone before, to sever the past from the future. She'd made herself believe this was possible in the gasping shock of her appearance, as the doctor cut the cord and she cradled a wailing Stella in her arms. But above that, above exhaustion and unimaginable pain, she'd felt devastating wonder at the fragility of new life that had issued from her body. Her resolution had soon dissolved. It could never be so. For 2.5 decades later, the past and her guilt were still with her, stalking her, tapping her on the shoulder. Beyond the single flower held in her hand, and beyond the merging rose bushes that her late mother-in-law had planted and tended, stood her home. In the glorious light of that summer's afternoon, all shimmering radiance and flickering shadows, the Elizabethan chimneys and gabled end of Forstall Manor comforted her. The half-timbered walls settled solidly into the earth. The house looked exactly as it had 400 years ago, and was brimming with secrets, witness to so much. Every so often, it revealed clues of its own mysteries to her. The mummified mice in the wainscots, the marks of the carpenter's chisel on the great beam above the fireplace, the kitten paw prints baked into the bricks by the front door. And Forstall knew all that she had done, secreting its knowledge inside its ancient beams. Eliza gazed up at the facade, squinting in the hazy sunshine. Behind those drawn curtains flapping in the breeze, second casement along, Stella was sleeping. Her daughter's sudden arrival home early that morning from London, carrying a battered suitcase and wearing go-go boots, set a black line of irritation scraping down Eliza's spine. But the balmy afternoon air, drifting gently around her, worked hard to evaporate her sourness. Here, in the garden created by the grandmother Stella never knew, Eliza cut roses for her daughter, a private gesture of belated welcome. An apology. Stella might like the roses, but then again, she might not even notice. Holding the stem between her fingers, Eliza leant in with her secateurs. The breeze quickened, stealing for a moment the sweet, buttery fragrance. She recoiled. The sharp bite of the thorn drew a bubble of blood. The prick of pain shocked her, sending her attention darting down its dark, inevitable path. She popped her finger in her mouth and tasted old pain, the remorse and misery that Stella's birth had failed to extinguish. She drew a hard breath and mechanically, mindlessly, began to cut the roses. With her trug full of blooms, she wandered back up the path to the house, pausing in front of the front door. The inscription carved into the threshold at her feet read, "Iter meum perfectum est." My journey is finished. She had read these words 1,000 times, and they were a salve to her, were steady and always true. Inside the dim, cool hallway, the Jacobean staircase rose to the half-landing where sunbeams highlighted a rather ambitious cobweb spanning the highest corner. Stella used to sit up there as a little girl, Eliza remembered, on the turn in the stairs behind those thick tapestry curtains. Perhaps she'd thought herself invisible, spying on what the grown-ups were doing. And yet they'd hear her chattering and having funny little conversations with herself. The clock on the hall stand ticked devotedly, and the sound of the home service drifted from the radio through the kitchen door. Eliza walked to the sink and filled a vase, her attention drawn through the open window overlooking the back garden. A blackbird hopped across the square lawn, and Morris, her father-in-law, was showing her mother a particularly tall hollyhock in his prized herbaceous border. They stood in the shadow of the Stour wing, along the east side of the garden, and Eliza could hear their soft, companionable murmuring. Each of them widowed, they rubbed along easily together at Forstall. She gave them a quick, grateful smile. She and Stella both shared her mother Matilde's looks. A generous mouth, the lips slightly downturned as if always on the edge of a wry smile. But while she and Matilde had clear blue, courageous eyes, Stella's were a muddy green. It was the thick, russet hair that linked grandmother to mother to daughter. Matilde's was now bright and snowy, while her own was inevitably going that way, sprinkled lightly with silver. But over her forehead, a lock of white had appeared, quite suddenly, soon after she gave birth to Stella. Clutching the vase of roses in one hand and a mug of tea for Stella in the other, Eliza walked across the hallway, passing the mirror. She tipped her head to the side, and the shock. On the half landing, near Stella's hiding spot, she put the vase and mug down on the table and made a slow appreciation of the framed photographs. Her parents' wedding, just after the First World War. Her father Richard out of uniform, her mother Matilde in a gown that showed her ankles. They'd met when Matilde nursed Richard in a field hospital in France, not far from her Picardy home. In the photograph, he is frail, half a man. He'd saved the life of his captain, Maurice Staveley, after he'd taken a bullet to the shoulder. Richard had helped Maurice into his gas mask before fitting his own, strictly against orders. The gas killed Richard, eventually. He, the hero, had brought the two families together, and was the reason they were all here at Forstall. And yet, Eliza could barely remember him. Maurice and Sybil, older than her parents, had snatched their moment by marrying in 1914, before Maurice headed off to France. Sybil was beautiful, bright and slender. She had been fair-haired, just like Nicholas, so very fair. Eliza averted her eyes from the keen face that gazed openly through the lens. She moved on to her brother Martin. He shone, confident and clear-eyed, out of his photograph, smart and buttoned up in RAF uniform. His shoulders were set with pride, but even though he was trying to be formal, with leather gloves and brill-creamed hair, Eliza knew he was perched on the edge of laughter. The Luftwaffe shot him out of the sky over the white cliffs. When she was little, Stella had not understood. She'd often demanded that Eliza tell her where Uncle Martin might be if he was not in the churchyard and not in the sky. There was no photograph of Eliza and Nicholas's wedding, for that day had been famously broken up by air raids. No evidence of their wedding and, thought Eliza, picking up the vase and mug and walking up the second flight of stairs, since Nicholas had been sleeping in the Stour wing for more years than she could care to remember. No evidence of a marriage either. Eliza stopped outside the door to Stella's bedroom. She listened. The ancient house creaked around her, listening too, heating up and exhaling under the afternoon sun, issuing dry smells of dust and soot and an organic aroma from its corners, plaster, polish, and mouse. From Stella's bedroom, she caught a faint whiff of patchouli. Eliza eased the door open a fraction more and peered in. In the dim, curtained light, she could make out the long shape of her sleeping daughter, her hair a dark mass on the pillow. A startling rush of envy switched into outrage. When she had been Stella's age, at the height of the war, it would have been a scandal to be lying in bed in the middle of the day. But then Stella had looked so shattered and pale when she'd arrived home that morning, standing in the hallway with her suitcase at her feet, and appearing as delicate as a child. Her suitcase lay open now, spilling its contents onto the tatty sheepskin rug by the kidney-shaped dressing table. When she'd moved to Forstall, Eliza had saved coupons for the furniture in this room, and had sewn gingham curtains with her mother, got them wrong and started again. On a desk beside the dressing table stood Maurice's old typewriter, commandeered by Stella, and a rack of LPs. And on the floor, with a picture of the Rolling Stones taped to the lid, the dance set record player she and Nicholas had bought Stella the Christmas before last. Eliza took a step in and winced as the floorboards complained under her foot. She gingerly rested the vase of roses in front of the dressing table